Hello everyone, welcome to the first lesson in this new sequence of online lessons that we're going to start a new topic, coal mining in South Wales. So we've been looking at farming in South Wales, which is what we call a primary industry. Primary industry is any jobs or work that is related to working with what we call raw materials, so things that either grow in nature or occur naturally. So coal is also one of those because it's naturally occurring under the ground. So coal is another example of primary industry. What we're going to do today is identify the main differences between the two main types of coal mining that were going on in South Wales, deep mining and open cast mining, and we're going to fully annotate a diagram and photograph to illustrate the main features of a deep mine, I should say of, not if, and an open cast mine. So the first thing we need to do, I would like you to take a look at this photo and I would like you to write down, pause the video here a minute, go ahead and write down the title in the front of your books, please. Okay, so what I'd like you to do underneath where you've written the title is come up with 5 questions related to this photo. I'd like you to try and think of higher level questions. So who, what, where, when, why, or how. Those are fairly straightforward sentence starters for making a question. By all means, use some of them. But if you could use what if, should, could, then those are higher level questions that tend to invite more open answers. And the purpose of this is just to really get you thinking about what might be going on in this picture. So pause the video here for a moment and try and write 3 to 5 questions underneath where you've just written your title. Okay, so what we'll do at the end is circle back to some of your questions and see if we've answered them during the lesson. So, the next thing I'd like you to do, these are the 3 types of activities that go on that provide jobs. So you've got primary activity or the primary sector, primary industry. These are jobs that work with natural things, with raw materials like farming and mining, like I just said. You've then got secondary industry or secondary activities. These are jobs in manufacturing. So you take the raw materials and make them into something. For example, you take limestone and coal and iron ore and things like that and process it in a factory to make steel. You've then got tertiary jobs or tertiary activities in tertiary industry. These are professional level jobs, teachers and things like that. There's actually another level of industry above this called quaternary, which is services like research and IT and banking and things. But we're just going to deal with the 3 main ones. So pause the video here a moment, go ahead and write these key terms down in your book, please. Okay, let's get stuck into looking at coal mining in South Wales as an example of primary industry in our country. So, here's an image of a deep mine in South Wales. What you've got going on here is all sorts of things. You can see the valley sides in the background here, and you've got houses along here, and there's some kind of machinery here, and then really large buildings here, and then like a pile of rubble here, and then you can see carts on a railway line here, and there's some miners' look for scale. It gives you an idea of how big these mining areas are. So what you've got going on here, if I break it down, this is the pit winding gear. So underneath here, going under the ground, is what's called the shaft. It's a huge tunnel dug straight down. And that tunnel will have a system in it called a pulley system that will have a cage on it. And that cage is on the end of the pulley system, and this pit winding gear will turn and pull the cage up and down. And what that does is it not only brings the coal and the rock out of the mine, but it also takes the men in and out of the underground mine. You've then had to build lots of houses, because when coal is discovered in an area and a mine is created, that creates a lot of jobs. So people flock to the area and bring their families with them. So you need to build lots of houses quite quickly. So what tended to be set up in the mining industry areas was lots of rows of terraced houses, because it's walking distance from the mine and everyone lives close together in a really tight-knit community. Sometimes there was processing going on the mining site, so you might have a really big fire in one of these buildings called a furnace, and this is your furnace chimney where all the smoke would come out. Now, when you mine for coal, obviously it's not pure coal that you find, there's lots of rock in amongst it as well. So when it all comes out of the ground, you put the coal into the carriages to be taken off to wherever it's being sold to or going to be used, and it goes off down the railway line. All of the waste material that you don't want they tend to pile it up on the side of the mountain or side of the valley. It's called a slag heap or a waste heap. Okay, so now we've sort of visualized it in real life, what we're going to do is draw our own version as a diagram. Okay, so imagine I've sort of cut down through the land and we're looking at this sideways on. So what you can see here, all of this is underground. Here's the sides of the valley. Okay, and this is part of the reason that deep mining in Wales was so popular, because nature had done half of the digging for you. You're already part way down towards the underground bands of coal. Now these bands of coal are called a coal seam. All right, so what would happen is at the bottom of the valley, you would build some pit winding gear and you would dig the main vertical shaft. You'd then start, until you hit a coal seam, you'd then start to dig out sideways and extract all of the coal and send it up and down in the cage. To keep this tunnel open, you'd put little props in, and these were made out of wood. And this is where there would be men working down here, but believe it or not, there would also be ponies working down here. They're called pit ponies. The further you dug along the coal seam, to pull the carriages out, to put them in the cage, to be taken up and sent off down the railway, you'd have ponies, horses working down here, that would also be taken up and down in that cage. So you'd have pit ponies working down here and men working down here. And when this coal seam was exhausted, when there was nothing left, you'd dig further down to the remaining coal seams. Here's your miners' houses right next to where the coal mining site was developed. And here's your waste heap up on the side of the valley. Now, because Wales is so mountainous, quite often under the ground there are giant cracks, giant areas of weakness. These are called fault lines. And they're very, very dangerous. As you can see here, this coal seam used to be one continuous line there and one continuous line there, but what's actually happened is it's like it's slipped downwards along the fault. That can happen, and disasters like that can kill a lot of miners. If you're mining in an area with a lot of faults, sometimes that fault can fail and there'll be a huge underground movement and it can cause the mining tunnel to collapse sometimes and kill miners. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video here a moment. If you need to re-listen to the description I've just given, by all means do so. But that description should help you to do two things. Number one, draw your own version of this basic deep mine cross-section. I'd say take about half a page in your books at least. Number two, take these labels and put them in the right place on your diagram. If you can't put it right next to where it needs to go because there's not enough space, feel free to put it where there is space and draw an arrow to the thing that you are labeling. So pause the video here a moment and go ahead and do that, please. Okay, so you should now have a diagram that looks something like this. So here's our pit winding gear that takes the ponies and the coal and the men and the rock in and out of the mine. Here's our deeper coal seams and our pit props where all of this has been dug out. So these are made of wood holding the coal mine open. There's your fault and your waste heap, your vertical shaft. Vertical means up and down, horizontal means sideways. So this would be a horizontal coal seam. This is a vertical shaft. There's your miner's housing. So this is called deep mining, and what would happen in Wales quite often is the coal seams that are accessible, we'd pull all of that coal out. These seams are sometimes too deep or too dangerous to get to because of fault lines. So what we started to do, instead of going in from above, we'd go in from the sides of the valley, and that's called open cast mining. And that's what we're going to move on to next. But before we do that, I'd like you to write a short explanation text of how deep mining works. So all the words you need for the gaps are at the bottom, and to help you along, because we're not in class together in case you get stuck, I've even put little starter letters in certain places for you. So I'd like you to copy and complete this either on the next page or underneath where you've just drawn your diagram, please. Okay, the last thing to do is to compare the first type of mining in Wales, the deep pit mining, with the open cast mining. So what you would do here is you would find an area where the coal is quite close to the surface and use dynamite to blast massive, massive holes in the ground. These trucks here, each of these tyres is probably about the height of the classroom, and just a single tyre costs 30 grand. So we've got very serious big machinery going on. This is across a huge, really large scale. What's sad is originally this would have all been grass and forestry and vegetation, and we've used dynamite to blast it out, a huge hole in the ground, to access the coal. So what I'd like you to do, you've got this photo in the handout that goes with this lesson. So if you're able to print it out, great. Print it and cut and stick it in the middle of a page. It's going to form the center of a spider diagram. If you can't cut and stick this image because you can't print it out, don't panic. Just put open cast mining in a bubble instead. So what we've got going on here is direct access to coal from the surface. That makes it easier, quicker and safer. You're not dealing with faults and things like that. And anything that is quicker and easier is going to make you money more quickly. So you're going to be making more profit. However, there's a lot of loose soil and dust, as you can see. So as soon as it rains, that gets washed into the local rivers and it contaminates the water supply for fish, for animals and for people. You've also destroyed a massive area of habitat, and that could mean that species might go extinct in this area because they've got nowhere to live. Extinct means that there's no more left of them at all in some cases, or they might be extinct just in that area. Lots of trucks and dynamite are used for blasting, so you're going to get a lot of noise pollution, and that will drive any remaining animals out of the area, and it's also not going to be very nice for local residents. It will make it quite a stressful, noisy place to live, and it lowers their quality of life. And finally, you've got lots of machinery that runs on petrol or diesel. Petrol and diesel are made from oil. Oil is what we call a fossil fuel. There are 3 fossil fuels: coal, oil, and natural gas. They're called fossil fuels because they're made from dead stuff. They're made from fossils. Coal is mostly fossilized dead plants, oil is mostly fossilized animals, and natural gas is produced from the decomposing of the dead animals and dead plants to make the coal and oil. Fossil fuels are great because when we burn them, you get a massive amount of energy from them, and we can use that to power cars, trucks, aeroplanes, power the central heating in our homes, power stations to make products or produce electricity. We use it for an awful lot of things, including powering these trucks. However, when you burn a fossil fuel, coal, oil, or natural gas, it creates a lot of air pollution that's full of carbon dioxide and other gases that create global warming. They create climate change. So the thing with open cast mining, it's great for people and the economy. It makes a lot of money quite quickly. But in terms of the impact on the environment, it's really not great. And that's what we're going to look at next lesson, is how does coal mining affect the environment and how can we reduce the lasting damage left behind from coal mining in South Wales, because the majority of our mines have now closed down in South Wales and they leave a huge scar on the landscape. You can see, look at the state of this. But there are ways to sustainably repair the area. So, pause the video here, create a spider diagram just like this in your book by copying these notes, and then I'll see you for next lesson where we will further investigate the impact of mining on people and the environment.